Frozone, Elsa, Zane from the goat that is Lego Ninjago, that one X-Men, that other X-Men. All excellent symbols of just ice. What? Justice? It clearly says just ice. Oh, well, alright everyone, scrap it all, gotta rewrite the whole thing. We here at H-Way Politics greatly value our dedication to the truth. Just, starting now. So, hello, welcome back. Today I have a topic that has been brewing in my mind for a while now. Something that has a huge amount of important history and has had great amounts of influence over how we structure one of the most important functions of our society. Justice. I was inspired to make this video now, specifically because I had just finished reading It's Never Too Late, which is a book written about prison by prisoners, and there is a review for it up on H-Way Book Reviews, so go check that out, link in the description, and while you're down there, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I get a hit of dopamine every time. You know, what else more could you want? Specifically, as this topic is simultaneously too broad and also too narrow on its own, the goal today is to discuss the different theories and philosophies behind justice and how they influence how we conceive of justice to begin with. It should hopefully need no introduction as a term, but at risk of being a little obtuse, justice is, at its broadest, a concept revolving around fairness and what people deserve. In a completely just society, everyone would get exactly what they deserve. It is unjust, then, when one who deserves more gets less, and one who deserves less gets more. This sense of deservingness can come from a variety of places, depending on things like one's political or ethical beliefs. I believe we are all deserving of basic human decency. Someone who disregards all moral claims as nonsense would be apt to disagree and may even say there is nothing we are inherently deserving of. A capitalist would probably suggest we are all deserving of opportunity, but only by utilizing that opportunity are we deserving of more. Meanwhile, a socialist would likely claim that we are all inherently deserving of certain material means and livelihoods. In a more limited application, which is relevant to our discussion today, justice is the institution which society utilizes to give people what they deserve. Most commonly, we will think of legal or criminal justice. Though it may not seem like it on the outset, when someone commits a crime, the implicit claim embedded within recognizing something as a crime is that the offender deserves something for doing it. Again, most commonly we think of punishment. Someone who steals, we may believe, knowingly or not, deserves to have those stolen possessions taken from them and returned to their rightful owners. This is not exactly revelatory. On the more extreme level, we may believe, obviously depending on your beliefs here, that a mass murderer deserves to be killed. In being charged, tried, and ultimately found guilty, we socially determine what someone deserves and administer that to them. But when it comes to our criminal justice, especially in our modern Western societies, which I'm assuming most of you are from due to simple demographic logistics, there is more to it than that. The justice system acts not only as justice, but also as a system. Again, this intro very much runs the risk of being obtuse. What this means is that there are certain social functions it is ascribed to carry out beyond administering justice itself. The justice system also serves, as it is formulated in Western civilization, to keep society orderly, in line, to protect people as well, and to ensure that future crimes aren't committed. They also propose to help the victims of crimes, to bring them peace and comfort, at least insofar as it can, limited temporally and causationally as we are. These extra functions can also, if you get into it, be viewed as other applications of administering what people deserve. Society and the people in it deserve certain treatment which crime violates. People deserve not to be the victims of crime. And people deserve retribution when they have been wronged. However, these deeper conceptualizations of it, although important, are decidedly too reductive when we look at this through a more material lens, as I intend to do towards the end. The point of the material analysis is that these functions, which our justice system intends to do, are materially measurable. We can completely put aside why we do it to focus on how we should do it in order to achieve certain goals. Certainly, no discussion is complete without going over why we have those goals, which I promise I won't ignore entirely, but the why has been just as much altered by our methodology as our methodology has by our ideals. Those taken together have produced 3 primary schools of thought for how our justice system should categorically work. Almost no one will suggest that one of them has absolutely zero place in our society, but almost everyone subscribes to one overall to the relative exclusion of the other 2. These 3 schools of thought are Rehabilitative Justice, Punitive Justice, and Isolationist Justice. They each tend to serve one goal better than the others, but one has certainly dominated modern institutions more than the rest. Let's take a look at Punitive Justice first. Do the crime, do the time. It has become a mantra of sorts for how we view criminality and the justice system as a whole. It is emblematic of the popular conception of justice being almost exclusively punitive, to the point that other rationales seem foreign, even hostile. Crimes themselves are often viewed as moral transgressions, which is not an unfair perspective to take. While ethics and law are ultimately independent, most law is based around some form of ethics, and Western law is built around Western ethics for the most part. I hope we do not have to debate whether or not killing an innocent person is immoral. Understandably, it is also illegal. The person who does such a thing, the convicted murderer, is deserving of punishment. They ought to, so the line of thought goes, be actually physically punished for the crime. This is most apparent in crimes with obvious moral connotations, but is still present in more dubious ethical queries. It's difficult to say precisely why building 2 residential properties on a plot of land designated to only have one is immoral. Nevertheless, it is illegal, and a crime committed is still a crime, and the offender ought to be punished for it. This thinking is certainly not new. In ancient India, for example, justice originated as revenge, a personal phenomenon which had yet to be turned into an institution proper, but was socially acceptable. And as it developed, this notion of punishing wrongdoers remained, such that it was recognized as one of the main forces or sanctions behind criminal justice entirely. It's a compelling thought. It is an almost universal thought, even, being either implicit or entirely explicit in almost every religion the world over. Transgressions result in punishment, whatever shape or form that punishment may take. Materially, the goal as we think of it now is to disincentivize crime. No one wants to be punished, presumably. That's the whole point of it. It serves as a counterforce to whatever is driving people towards crime. If you don't want to do community service or be fined or go to prison or be executed, don't do whatever it is that results in that. Like spanking a child. If you don't want that to happen, don't throw a tantrum in public or whatever the case may be. By enacting this type of justice, a presumed rational agent will have to weigh whether or not what they do is indeed worth it. And this is important, the rational agent. Our justice systems assume that we are indeed rational agents, capable of rational thinking and decision-making. We must be independent and individual and capable of making choices on our own, or else the entire justification breaks down, punitive or not. To go back to revenge, this is the other side of punitive justice. It is not just that a criminal ought to face some tangible negative consequences to their actions, but also that, through punishment, we can bring a sense of justice to the aggrieved party. It may not be able to restore a burnt home, but in arson, being locked up for life as punishment for what they did is both metaphysically and physically important to the person who lost their home. The balance is being restored of sorts. Generally, then, those who subscribe to punitive justice will advocate for harsher punishments. Prison should not be cozy in any sense of the word. It should be grueling and maybe even painful because the prisoners deserve that sort of treatment for what they did. This may also lead to an advocacy for more crime-specific punishments. If you are meant to receive certain treatment for the actions you did, it only makes sense that that treatment is karmic. An eye for an eye. If you kill someone, you should, in turn, be killed. Perhaps not necessarily at a 1-to-1 ratio. Most people won't go around saying that every single killer ever ought to be given the death penalty, though some certainly will, but at least as a general principle. A thief ought to lose their own possessions. If you are willing to steal from others, you deserve to know what that sense of loss feels like. Generalized, a criminal deserves to know the effects of their crimes. This also leads some people towards advocating for harsher punishments as a rule. It's not exactly explicit that they should be treated harshly, but I would argue that it is at least implicit. Punitive justice relies on the notion that a criminal deserves harm, and moreover that they brought it upon themselves. It is incredibly easy to develop more intense feelings on the matter when those beliefs are adopted. A criminal has absolutely no one to blame but themselves, and the harm that comes to them is not only justified, but morally good. They therefore deserve the worst we have to offer them. Why give the man 3 fully nutritious meals a day under this lens? Why should we treat them with any semblance of decency? It does often get tempered with at least the recognition that not all crimes are the same or deserving of the same. But after a certain threshold of severity is reached, the criminal is dehumanized by necessity of accepting the premises of punitive justice. But, as I said, very rarely does this act in isolation. Hey, guess which one's next? Lock them away and throw away the key. The goal isn't necessarily that they deserve the harm of prison, but that a criminal deserves to be isolated from the rest of society, or that society deserves to have them isolated from us. Crime is explicitly a violation of societal rules. If you cannot follow the rules, you should not be here among those that do. This still has ties to morality, of course. An immoral actor should not have the benefits of a moral society, and a moral society should not have to deal with an immoral actor. If you kill someone, you demonstrate that you cannot engage with our moral reasonings and rules. The convicted murderer, then, ought to be isolated from us. Whether or not prison is comfortable or conducive to proper behavior or outright harmful is not really relevant. We don't have to care. We just need to know that we are safe from them, that their disruptions will no longer affect us. Isolationist justice is the time out, removing an unruly child from their playmates and the rest of the house or school or wherever they may be, not so that they experience pain, though it certainly is uncomfortable and unfun, but so that what they did can no longer continue. You cannot break the law if you have no capabilities to do so. You cannot harm anyone if there is no one around you to harm, or at least no one innocent. This thought, of course, goes back a long time. It is indeed the primary reason prisons developed at all. Before they were a popular social institution, punishment was dealt with very readily by way of physical harm or execution. Prisoners were instead kept in dungeons. The prison as we understand it today, of course, did not come about until much later, with prior penitentiaries still being quite harsh environments and the general ethos of ancient civilizations still being what we would consider today to be pretty barbaric. Regardless, at least some hint of isolationist policy can be gleaned, where it later developed into what it is now and continues to serve as the primary thought behind prisons as a location away from the rest of society. Certainly, the prison serves as a place of punishment, both in history and presently, but the driving thought behind their construction, just not always their use, is to keep prisoners away from civil society. Solitary confinement may be thought of as similar. Though overwhelmingly used for its punitive aspects, it is meant to be isolationist. In solitary confinement, the prisoner is totally removed from human interaction, and almost always with sufficient room to do much of anything, and certainly receives very little sunlight. The Quakers, it turns out, tried to use solitary confinement as a tool of personal reformation in the late 1700s, that removing them from evil influences in society would help them. As Stuart Gracian put it, quote, "A noble experiment that was an absolute catastrophe." Perhaps an important lesson to learn from solitary confinement is that often, punishment and isolation go hand in hand. This could likely be gleaned from the history of prison as a whole, that in isolation abuse is easy to perform and hard to stop. Solitary confinement itself is disastrous and often labeled as a violation of human rights with how severe a punishment it is. The lesson may instead be said to be that isolation is punishment and that the two cannot be separated. This is not a proposition everyone will ascribe to, however. This is especially true when we consider its goal materially, not merely conceptually. The most easily understood aspect is that, well, it can literally keep people safe and prevent further crime. If criminals are removed from society, their future crime, if indeed there be some, is prevented. It is supposed to explicitly keep people safe by physically removing those that would harm them. Secondarily, it still serves as a reason not to commit crime in the first place. If you would like to continue to enjoy society and the benefits it provides to and your friends and your family, you should not do the activity which would result in you losing all of that. This is kept separate from punishment because you are not removed as a means to harm you or as some sort of moral revenge, but rather as a necessary result of preventing those actions from reoccurring, and that is simply something you must consider before doing them. To accept isolationist justice, you must generally accept two underlying premises. You must, of course, accept that we are sufficiently individual, rational agents, that our choices are our own, and that we inherently hold responsibility for them. The second is that someone who has committed crime at some prior point is therefore more likely to commit crime in the future. This is necessary to accept because it firstly supports the whole notion of protecting society from their actions. If everyone is equally likely to commit crimes at all times, there's no point in removing anyone from society as it will do nothing. The premise, secondly, provides reason not to separate everyone permanently. The most effective way at reducing crime is going to be physically not letting anyone commit crime ever, but of course that is simply untenable, except for the most egregious totalitarians ever. Thus, we merely act on what has been done before, and therefore what can be said on what is likely to be in the future. These premises, however, when accepted and untempered by other forces, can lead to dehumanization of criminals by those who believe them. It is easy to advocate for longer and longer stints in prison as a rule. As with punitive justice, it is easy to accept that they did this themselves and that the responsibility is entirely their own to bear. Anything that comes as a consequence is then their problem, not ours. Why should we bother remembering where their key is? Moreover, it is easy to become increasingly in favor of longer and longer sentencing, reducing the convict from a person to a mere likelihood of future crime. The untempered premise is not bound by any time constraints. If you have committed a crime in the past, you are more likely to do it again in the future, and the future extends to your whole life. Why should they ever be let out? They will just continue to cause more problems, and after all, it's their fault they're in there. After a certain point in severity, they ought to be removed from society for life. This point also extends to encompass more and more crimes, more and more criminals. There is, however, a third option. Perhaps it is even worse than what we have gone over already, but it is at least bad in a new way. Criminals are made, not born. Rehabilitative justice takes a whole new form. The goal of the justice system is not to punish or to isolate, but to help the criminal, to reform them, rehabilitate them. No longer would the criminal be dealt harm as revenge for their moral failings. No longer would the criminal be removed from society in order to stop their disruptions. Crime is wrong, of course, at least to a large degree. Crime is still disruptive, often not just socially, but morally too. The point, according to those who advocate this line of thinking, is not to accept harmful and disruptive behavior, but to recognize that that behavior almost always, so they say, happens for a reason. Dead is the paradigm that we are all fully independent and rational actors with sole responsibility. We all share some responsibility for how people behave. Thus, we all share some responsibility for making them better. We have long held this goal without accepting fully the social justifications behind most of its advocacy. Some crimes are mundane, and this has always been recognized. Though what precisely is considered mundane has changed with time and civilization, the fact remains that some mundane crimes exist. The mundane criminal doesn't really need punishment, for their sins are not too great, and they don't really need to be removed from society, as their risk is not too high. Instead, they ought to be reformed. Or even in some cases of severe crimes being committed, the person's criminality was chalked up to any number of supernatural explanations which made reforming them not only possible, but necessary as to purge their society from that evil. Rehabilitation has always been there, just in the background of criminal justice systems rather than the forefront. Contemporarily, more effort is being put into making it to the forefront. They are still humans. They still deserve human rights. They still deserve adequate treatment. They may not deserve to be within society at large, nor may they deserve to have absolutely nothing happen to them, but they do not deserve to be harmed or kept from every other part of their lives. More than that, they deserve help. Why does a criminal commit crime? If you subscribe to punitive or isolationist justice primarily, you are likely to suggest that someone commits crime out of selfish and individual desire. Someone subscribing to rehabilitative justice as the predominant form of justice is more apt to say a criminal commits crime out of necessity or out of social conditioning. No longer is the bread thief stealing bread for greed, they are doing so to be able to eat. No longer is the convicted murderer merely a bad person given an opportunity to do bad, an opportunity they would utilize again if given the chance. Instead, the murderer is overwhelmingly someone driven to the edge mentally, someone desperate for a way to survive or get out of a life-ruining circumstance. Or perhaps the murderer was conditioned in their life to value certain things above all else, such as social status. That is the reality of those living in poverty, anyway. When you have very little materially, the immaterial becomes the only things you have left to value and to defend. After a certain point, they are no longer acting alone, and through years of being told what to think and to act a certain way, and being pressured into it by the physical conditions around them, a person may be willing to kill to protect their social status, or any other given abstract concept. Gone is the selfish criminal, and here is the man in unfortunate circumstances. Rehabilitative justice is primarily preventative, like isolationism, but it achieves this through different means. The goal is to change the person so that they will no longer commit crime. This can be done through a variety of means, and often those specific means will have to change depending on the specific criminal. The thought is that people do crime mainly because of reasons acting upon them, and therefore if you can change those reasons, that person will no longer commit that crime. Really, that is the only premise. To accept rehabilitative justice, you indeed do not need to accept that we are all independent and rational agents. A huge part of its acceptance comes from supporting the very opposite. If we are not independent, if we cannot be held completely accountable for what we do, how can it truly be said that we deserve to be harmed or that we deserve to be separated? In short, it can't. If we accept this, we are liable to go further. Rehabilitative justice has as its main methodology the goal of ending the reasons people commit crimes. But true criminal prevention lies not in how we respond to crime already thence committed, but in how we stop crime from existing at all. Under both punitive and isolationist justice, there doesn't exist a framework within them on their own to really respond to crime beforehand. Rehabilitative justice, however, provides just that framework. We identify why people commit crime and can therefore work on solving whatever those reasons are before they result to crime in the first place. If people steal because they are desperate to eat, the way to solve that is to keep them fed. If people kill because they are in a part of the country that is dangerous and untrustworthy, wherein they live by the sword and need to constantly be on edge, we need to work on making the environment itself less hostile to people. It would be far too simple of a conceptualization to say rehabilitation solely focuses on changing criminals. But putting this at the forefront can, according to some, lead to even bigger problems. It runs the risk of humanizing that which should not be humanized. It also runs the risk of de-individuating that which should remain individuated. Some people simply cannot be rehabilitated. Those people are also liable to use rehabilitation programs as a means of escape through deceit, lying about their progress to get out only to commit their crimes all over again. Similarly, we are still responsible for our actions to a certain degree. The man in bad circumstances is still morally responsible for what they do. The family and friends of a murder victim still deserve retribution. While it is easy to agree with such things on paper, without tempering the premise behind rehabilitative justice, it is also easy to stray beyond them in practice, and it is easy to get swept up in its goals and go too far, ultimately leading to more overall harm being done to innocent people. But on a literal, real-world level, which idea can actually hold its water? In all such manners of thinking about how our criminal justice system ought to place its primary emphasis in regards to interacting with criminals, we always seek how best to prevent crimes and stop recidivism. The ethics of the matter to the most part to the side, i.e. disregarding for a moment what criminals morally deserve, which method actually results in what it claims. Or rather, what results in it the best. Let's keep this simple. With our only goal being to materially reduce criminality and recidivism, rehabilitative justice is superior. Norway has been a country long lauded as a great example of the principles of rehabilitative justice, and for no small reason. Their justice system greatly emphasizes it, with much shorter prison sentences than the US, which is famous for its punitive and isolationist justice system. Almost no overcrowding, much better staff-to-inmate ratios, more freedom, and more responsibilities. Prisoners in Norway are also able to access education and job training, drug and mental health help, and upon release, integration services such as social support and help in the labor market. Also, there is a significant separation between minor and major criminals, keeping low-level and high-level offenders in different prisons in different environments. And when examining the criminal justice system in Norway, it was found that imprisonment actively reduced future criminal behavior. This is, however, relegated to those who are unemployed prior to being sentenced. Among those unemployed prior, their participation in the job market after their release increased by 40%, and within 5 years, the chance of reoffending, or the recidivism rate, dropped by 46%. Those who were employed had no changes, but even that is still significant. In the US, prison actively increased recidivism and decreased labor market participation. The benefits don't stop there either. Spillover effects, which are how imprisonment of an individual affects those around them, are also beneficial for Norwegian society. Due to the emphasis on rehabilitation and shorter sentences, children whose fathers are sent to prison have no significant impacts on their future chances of crime and no impacts on their grades in school. In criminal networks, when one person is imprisoned, the chances of their peers being charged drops by 51%, and in a specific case of when a younger brother has an older brother incarcerated, the younger brother's chance of committing crime drops by 32%. Research has also been conducted on various initiatives at rehabilitation within the US itself as well, all to the same effect. Prisoners who engage in correctional education programs while imprisoned have a 43% lower chance of returning to prison than those who do not. Indeed, for every single dollar spent on these programs, $4 to $5 are saved from the costs of reincarceration that were prevented. A job training program known as Federal Prison Industries boasted results like 24% lower recidivism for inmates who worked with them and were 14% more likely to be gainfully employed after release. Evidence also demonstrates that other programs significantly reduce recidivism, including cognitive behavioral therapy. And then there's the feel-good story that makes the rounds on the internet every now and again, where a prison in Indiana worked with the APL, wherein prison inmates could adopt cats from a local shelter. Having something to care for them and being able to love a pet provided incredible opportunities for personal growth for the prisoners, and by caring for the pet, they were encouraged to join job training programs, education programs, and work towards getting out and becoming productive. Overwhelmingly, addressing the reasons behind why people commit crimes works better to stop crime than to keep them afraid of punishment. Criminal justice has too long been organized around this notion that we are all completely independent and wholly rational actors. This is just not the case. There are always external reasons for how we act, and though we may still hold the responsibility for how we act regarding those forces, they still push and pull us in certain directions. Criminals overwhelmingly do not concern themselves with prison until after they have committed the crime. You cannot act perfectly rational when you need to find quick money to feed yourself or your family, for example. You do not weigh the costs of prison and the chances you get caught. You simply weigh whether or not you need food. As ideal as it would be, a human cannot subsist off of hope for a better tomorrow alone. They still need to eat today. But, yeah. This has been A2A Politics, and thank you for watching and all that jazz. Bit of a different style, certainly less of my usual intrusions into the actual topic, but I hope you enjoyed it. Every source I utilized throughout this video is available in the description below, as well as the link to the book review on this, which again is about prison written by prisoners to prevent people from going to prison more. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Like I said, it does help. I get a hit of dopamine every time those numbers go up. And who knows, that might be the only thing keeping me from jail. I could be in your house right now. You better hit those buttons right now. But aside from that, let me know what you think about this topic. A specific question I have for you is this. At what point do we draw the line between material benefit and moral deservingness? That is, at what point can we ignore rehabilitation and focus on punishment instead? How bad does someone have to act? Perhaps I'll answer that for myself sometime in the future. But until that day, this has been A2A Politics. Never stop learning.
Do I get a cameo then?
Yeah.
Let's go. Give me a kiss, big guy.